I never thought I would end up on the last train to nowhere. But that's what happened when I missed my connection at the station and had no other choice but to board the only train that was still running. It was a dark and stormy night, cliché as it sounds, and the station was almost deserted. The only people I saw were a few homeless people huddled in a corner, a bored-looking ticket seller, and a man in a trench coat and hat who seemed to be waiting for something. I approached the ticket seller and asked him if there was any way I could get to my destination, which was a small town about 2 hours away. He shook his head and said that all the trains were canceled due to the weather, except for one. "The last train to nowhere," he said with a grimace. "It leaves in 5 minutes, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's an old and unreliable train that goes through some dangerous places. No one knows where it ends up. Some say it never stops. Some say it disappears into thin air. Some say it's haunted by the souls of the dead." I shivered at his words, but I was desperate. I had to get to my destination by morning, or else I would lose my job and my apartment. I had no money for a hotel or a taxi. I had no friends or family to call for help. I had nothing but a backpack with some clothes and a laptop. I decided to take my chances with the last train to nowhere. I bought a ticket from the seller, who gave me a pitying look, and ran towards the platform where the train was waiting. The train looked old and rusty, like it belonged in a museum. It had only one car. There were no windows, only metal bars. There were no seats, only wooden benches. There were no passengers, only me. I got on the train and sat on one of the benches. The door slammed shut behind me and locked with a loud click. I heard the engine start and felt the train move. I looked around and saw that there was no conductor or driver. There was no sign of anyone else on board. There was no map or timetable. There was no way to communicate with anyone outside. I felt a surge of panic and tried to open the door, but it was locked. I banged on it and shouted for help, but no one answered. I realized that I was trapped on the last train to nowhere. I sat back down and tried to calm myself. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe the train would stop at some point and let me off. Maybe I would find someone who could help me along the way. I took out my laptop and tried to connect to the internet, but there was no signal. I tried to call someone on my phone, but there was no service. I tried to listen to some music on my headphones, but there was no sound. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead and a knot in my stomach. I wondered how long the train would run and where it would go. I looked at my watch and saw that it was midnight. The storm outside was getting worse. The thunder roared and the lightning flashed. The rain pounded on the roof of the car. The train sped up and swayed from side to side. It made loud noises that sounded like metal scraping on metal. It jerked and jolted as if it was going over bumps and holes. I held onto the bench and prayed that the train wouldn't derail or crash. I looked at my watch again and saw that it was 1 a.m. The storm still raged on. The train still ran. I started to feel dizzy and nauseous from the motion of the train. I felt a headache coming on from the lack of sleep and food. I looked at my watch again and saw that it was 2 a.m. The storm showed no signs of stopping. The train showed no signs of slowing down. I started to hallucinate from the stress and fatigue. I saw shadows moving in the corners of the car. I heard voices whispering in my ears. They said things like, "You're doomed. You'll never get off this train. You'll die here. You're not alone." I covered my ears and closed my eyes, but they didn't go away. I looked at my watch again and saw that it was 3 a.m. The storm reached its peak. The train reached its limit. I heard a loud bang and felt a sharp pain in my chest. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the man in the trench coat and hat standing over me with a knife in his hand. He smiled and said, "Welcome to nowhere."